Hi everyone! So a couple of days ago I submitted my master's dissertation, so I have now officially finished my second master's, and I'm in a kind of weird limbo stage now between my master's and PhD. So I really wanted to kind of jump right back in and start making videos again and start blogging and start getting myself back in the habit of interacting with you guys because that didn't really happen for me during my master's, and that is something I absolutely want to change for the PhD. It's kind of imperative for me at this point that I make that happen for the duration of the PhD, because I feel like if I don't do it now, I will just keep getting swept up in the obligations that are kind of imposed on me from outside sources, and everything that I do with the channel and the website and everything as Anya Orga will sort of dissipate, and I don't want that to happen, because making these videos and blogging and doing all this stuff and being Anya Orga essentially, having this presence online has been one of the most satisfying thing that I've done in a really long time. Actually, it's been very, very creatively and emotionally satisfying, and it's really opened me up to a lot of different possibilities as to what I might do in the future and how I might move forward in the future with talking about this kind of stuff, blogging about it, writing ebooks about it, and that's a vision that I don't want to lose. It's a vision that I don't want to let slip through my fingers. So today, without further ado, I'm going to talk a little bit about something that I actually meant to mention in my last video, but I somehow managed to omit the footage from the video, which is probably just as well because it was fairly long anyway. But I was going to kind of mention it kind of almost with a bit of a teaser about my relationship with the Morrigan and how that has been, how it's like developed, how it feels for me now, and how I think it's going to be moving forward. To put it bluntly, my relationship with the Morrigan as it currently stands now, and as it has been for a couple of months, is pretty obsolete. I feel like, you know, it's just occurred to me right now that I feel like the Morrigan sort of brought me to Edinburgh and then just sort of left me again. And I don't know if maybe that's something that I need to accept and embrace to some extent, that perhaps the Morrigan as the Morrigan was not kind of a figure or a goddess who was going to be there to stay for me in a really central way in my spirituality, my spiritual practice. But what I have been realizing in recent months is that I think my approach to the Morrigan, the way it used to be, is just something that hasn't been working for me right now, because, you know, I've kind of discussed in a couple of videos how my spiritual practice has just changed because I don't have so much time for it, and how in many ways I think I feel less spiritual, less religious, I'm less caught up in that world than I used to be because I just have less time. I have less emotional and mental space to be caught up in that world. And for me, polytheistic devotion really requires a lot of dedication. It requires me to really be coming to the altar, coming to sacred space and doing ritual on a very regular basis in order to just keep that part of my mind kind of ticking over, because if I kind of let it slide like anything else, it starts to just feel very hollow and meaningless. And this is, you know, because of my attitude towards divinity, because of the way that I see deities, that I don't see them as kind of personified entities in and of themselves. They're more almost like portals to divinity. They're like a lens. They're like a part of my brain or a part of cosmos that can kind of talk to one another, and almost like slotting a jigsaw puzzle together, that if I look in the world in a certain way and access a certain part of my psyche, I can sort of tap myself into something greater than me and therefore look into the face of the divine. And that is definitely a technique that has always been very meaningful to me. It has always connected me very vividly and very viscerally with the divine. But like I say, it particularly in the last couple of years has required quite a lot of dedicated effort on my part to just kind of keep myself in the mindset where it makes sense for me to do that, you know, where it really makes sense for me to be a pagan in the polytheistic sense. But I realized recently that maybe rather than trying to keep going in the way that I used to be, rather than focusing on the Morrigan as a very specific deity, and her historicity, her mythology, her stories, and really getting to the bones of who the Morrigan really is, and the specificities of her stories. I thought that maybe rather than focusing on that, because of my dearth of time and energy to really maintain that level of relationship with a specific deity, that maybe actually what I needed to do was step back a bit again and start to look at divinity from a little bit more of an abstract perspective. Because you know, as my relationship with the Morrigan has waned, you know, my relationship with Odin also just never really got off the ground, and it is frustrating to me because I miss that. I miss that interaction, but I just feel like I'm not in a place where I can access it in the way that I used to, if you know what I mean. So I started to think about the concept of the archetype and how many of us see the gods as archetypes. And I started to think about, you know, kind of soft polytheism, and when you kind of step back a little bit from an individual deity and sort of lump them all in together in a kind of way. Like, I was thinking about sort of death goddesses, who the Morrigan is, what it is about the Morrigan that kind of drew me to her. And because I had been feeling very drawn and interested in Hecate recently as well, and I started to kind of think, well, what is the archetype that it is that I'm kind of so fascinated by, that brings me to the Morrigan again and again. And I think there's a lot about her quite specifically that draws me to her, and I will always have a special place in my heart for her. But the more I look at the detail of her stories and her specific connection with sovereignty and kind of the voice, storytelling, those kinds of aspects, battle and rage and that kind of thing, the more I kind of look at all of that, the more I feel like I'm actually starting to slide away a little bit from the part of the Morrigan that I feel connects me to the divine. And I find all of that very fascinating. I find all of her stories and her specificities quite fascinating. But I started to feel like maybe what it was that was really interesting to me about the Morrigan from a spiritual or religious sense was maybe one specific archetypal kind of energy that she brings to the table. And so I started to think about Hecate and maybe where the crossover was between the two of them. And what emerged for me after a little bit of thought, or it just kind of sprang out of nowhere, you know, the way that these thoughts do, as though it had kind of always been there. And it's kind of something that the language of it is actually there in my prayer to the Morrigan, which I used to speak every morning and which I still do on occasion get around to doing when I do my devotionals to her, to speaking when I do my devotionals to her. I have this little poem that I speak as part of my devotionals to her, and it does actually incorporate language which ties into this archetype. And the name that came to mind for me, and I was also thinking about Odin and the world tree, the name that came to mind for me was the Gatekeeper. And that just had so much power in it for me. And I mean, there are so many different directions you could take that one concept. I feel like the archetype of the Gatekeeper is incredibly broad, it's quite diffuse. But I wanted to look at a very specific kind of gatekeeper. To me, the gatekeeper in my mind, I suppose you could almost say that I've almost started to develop this idea of a whole new deity in my mind that is more a little bit more specific than any broad concept like death or the gatekeeper or anything like that, but kind of draws those things together, draws those aspects together. Something about the numinous, the liminal, death and decay, and how destruction and death is just so integral to the process of creation and rebirth, and how it's also integral to the process of transformation and transpersonal experience. And that's a big one for me, because when I first started to get back into spirituality, get back into paganism, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, 5 years ago now, what I was most interested in was experiences, transpersonal experiences, getting out of my own mundane experience of life and tapping into an altered state of consciousness or a concept or something, just something that would make me feel more connected to something bigger than me, but also that might tap me into that sense of the numinous, of the unknown, of divinity. And so for me, maybe the kind of key aspect of the Gatekeeper is, well, the key. The symbol of the key has been, is one that has kind of followed me for years now. More in connection with Odin and Ganesh. But it's something that has popped up again and again and again and again. And that has just always been, the image of the key and the threshold has been just so potent for me, so connected to death, because I feel that death is the death we experience is the ultimate moment kind of transpersonal expansion. It's the moment when we let slip away the uniqueness of our being and we slip back into the all. Whether you want to see that purely on a physical level of the atoms in our body, the cells in our body literally dissolving back into the earth, or on a kind of more spiritual level of the soul, whichever way I want to see that, or my consciousness, death for me really represents that threshold moment, that potentiality for experiencing the transpersonal, for expansion and for touching the infinite. And so I haven't actually had the time, because this is something that's only been going around my head now for maybe 2 months. So I haven't actually had the time yet to work with this concept and to kind of update my altar, my shrine to the Morrigan. Because I think from now on, my shrine to the Morrigan is no longer going to be purely to the Morrigan. It will incorporate elements that I associate with the Morrigan, but it will also incorporate elements associated with Hecate, with Odin, probably with Hel, and most likely with various other deities and figures that I come across, mythological figures that I come across, that just resonate with me, that kind of resonate that chord of the Gatekeeper. And I'm really excited about this, but I feel like it's something that I don't want to rush it. I don't want to force it. And the dismantling, I mean, I'm not sure if I am going to completely dismantle the shrine that I've put together for the Morrigan, because even once I started to look at it, I thought, well, there's actually nothing hugely specifically Morrigan-esque about it. It might be more focused on crows, ravens, and that sort of thing than some of the other symbols that I could include, such as keys. I'm looking at it right now, actually, if you can notice that I'm kind of looking across the room. It's kind of behind the camera. But I do want to think about how I can incorporate other aspects, other elements, other thoughts, and maybe a couple of other key symbols into that shrine. But I think allowing myself to release the Morrigan-ness of that shrine is really going to take a little bit of time and work. And I need to think about devotionals. I need to think about updated devotionals. Whether I want to continue very similar devotionals to what I had for the Morrigan, because I do feel like the entire time that I was working with the Morrigan, I was working with the Gatekeeper, because the Gatekeeper subsumes for me all of these different deities. But I think I would like to expand the shrine a little bit, so that maybe I can either address the Gatekeeper as a whole, or on specific days, if I feel like it, I can call on the Morrigan, or I can call on Hecate, I can call on Odin. But the Morrigan and Hecate are the two kind of main. I think Hel as well a bit. I don't know much about Hel, but I would be interested in learning more about her as well. Odin for the World Tree, and then Hecate and the Morrigan, I think will be the main players. But yeah, that's just where my thoughts are at right now with that. And because I haven't really done an update on my spiritual thoughts in a long time, mostly because I haven't really been evolving, because I haven't been practicing that much, I felt like it might be interesting to some of you to hear about my thoughts and hear about all of that. So I'll leave it there, and I'll be talking to you again very soon, I hope.